Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Orbit. And today I have a good friend, Jonathan van Belle, who is here to talk about his new book, Zenithism, which is coming out Valentine's Day, 2021.
Yes, by design.
By design. Jonathan, just to start, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get to where you are today?
First of all, thank you for having me and inviting me. So the sort of short biography is I was born in Southern California and slowly have migrated up north, I guess like geese returning. And I now reside in Oregon, specifically in Milwaukee, which is a suburb just south of Portland. And I now work at outlier.org, which is an online education company. And that is, there's a lot more detail, as you can imagine, but that is sort of the geographic and occupational view in a nutshell.
How would you describe your interests? Because I imagine you aren't really defined by your job. How else would you define yourself?
I'm defined by all things in context. So my interests are primarily philosophy. I got my bachelor's in philosophy from UC Berkeley. I just read philosophy constantly. My bookshelf is filled with some of my favorite works here. And so philosophy generally, but specifically in philosophy, I think philosophy of technology, philosophy of the future, theology actually as well, and Greek philosophy to some extent. Sort of the history of philosophy is also very fascinating. So those are my primary interests, what I kind of spend my time and what I feel flow states in, and what I find intrinsically valuable, in addition to writing about it, not just reading. As this book will show, hopefully, that
the merge of the interests.
I have exactly.
How did you arrive at studying philosophy in college? I feel like that's something that is a bit of a unique choice.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because it started in high school. So when I was in high school, I was kind of a rebellious person. I've always had a sort of rebellious streak, a sort of countercultural streak, particularly within my family. My family is predominantly religious, and I was not. I had questions about it. And I sort of started to look at just encyclopedias, to be honest. And I came across Immanuel Kant. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really fascinating stuff. And then I started to read, in freshman year, I read Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. And I think just the fact that there was this beautiful literary version of philosophy, but also this kind of cross-examination of everything important, I found super intriguing. So when I was kind of adrift. So when I went to, when I finally thought about college, I thought philosophy seems the most central interest that I have. I had a sort of economic interest for a brief time. I got an economics AA, but philosophy I continued through to the bachelor's. And it was about, I think, just because I'd grown up with a religious narrative, a religious structure, and I thought that it was an implausible view for various reasons, historically and morally. I thought, what do I believe? What should I seek? How do I live a good life? Should I live a good life? What is that? So all those questions, I think, I just felt like I needed something, and philosophy was the something.
That's awesome. I like that you mentioned how you were interested in the literary side of philosophy as well. And it makes me wonder when your writing life began.
Oh, my writing life began very young.
Okay.
So that's probably another inroad to philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But my writing life, I think I was writing some poems when I was 9 years old. The first poem that I have still a digital copy of, at least, I wrote when I was 9, and it was about the ocean. I lived in San Diego, and I would often go to La Jolla, which is this beautiful shore area with lots of caves and seals and Garibaldi, and there's so much oceanic marine life. Scripps Institute's down there is a big marine life sort of science institute. So I wrote that, and about the freedom of oceanic life, and just the beauty of the ocean. And ever since then, it started mostly with poetry. I think with a lot of people, it starts with poetry because you get a lot of closure really quickly, and you can kind of experiment very quickly. And then short stories. I think by 8th grade, I was doing like longer, short pieces. High school, I would write a lot. And it's been a curse and a blessing because, the bug of writing gives you these aspirations that are difficult in certain economies, let's say. You're like, I want to be a writer. You're like, so does everyone. So everyone has, I think, this creative aspiration. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And it's unfortunate that it's sort of competitive view on it. But anyways, so then I wrote a lot of essays, obviously, for college, which I think gave me this art of the analytic style, where I can not only be beautiful and imagistic, but also make interesting arguments for things and present persuasive views. And so I think what happens, I started to drift away from the literature towards what literature was what some of the sort of assumptions that authors would make about human beings or society or life. So I think I still write, and I still love the process of writing, but I have a very I guess more didactic urge. I think didacticism in writing can really make the writing bad. So it's an art form to like try to present ideas that you like without lampooning people, presenting one-dimensional views of the other side, which philosophy is supposed to do. It's supposed to strengthen your views of your perspectives, strengthen your sense of your opponent, so to speak, and be charitable. And I think so. It's literary. Anyways, yeah. So I've been writing a long time. Short story. Long story short, which is anyways.
Yes.
I'm trying to make a writer pun there.
I think like you do make writer puns, and I think the poetry paired with the kind of philosophy approach is what I loved about your previous books, which I have here. I saw that you have a third one which I don't have, which was I was sad about, but the Saint Stylite Trivialist Primer, and then the Adalaster Bay Book of Hours. Reading these, I like them because it's like hanging out with you, because it's a bit absurd, but definitely like coming from a swath of reading, and comes off as poetic. It's really incredible to leaf through. What would you say are recurring themes for these past 3 books? What was your goal with them, you think?
Well, I think that there's a bit of the first one, the primer, the Saint Stylite primer. Really, as I say, it's a primer. It's a sort of educational book, and its goal is to kind of have a fun lesson, so to speak, on poetry. So I demonstrate different kinds of poetic styles, the villanelle and haiku, and free verse, of course, is in there. And I just want people to have fun with poetry, because I think initially, I think a lot of people nowadays, when they think about poetry, there's a modern or a very contemporary style that's very monotonous. It's very kind of like, it's trying to demonstrate pain or a dissociative state sometimes. It's very, I walk to the, I don't want to lampoon it too much.
I know what you're thinking of, and like, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's like coffee shop slam poetry.
That's a good description. Yeah. And, I think that has its place. I think with anything, though, you can get too much of something.
Yes.
Or, it can kind of keep people back from doing things. So I wanted to write this sort of experiment in all kinds of styles, like playing with things, using even concrete poetry, or shape poetry, and just having fun with it. And I had a lot of poetry that I'd written for years and years. So this was my first book. So I thought, well, for a sense of closure, to kind of move on past this body, I wanted to put it into a structure. And I thought, well, it's so disparate, but what's a great structure? Hey, here are examples of poetry in a kind of lesson plan. And it's, so I think that the theme, so to speak, of that book was learning poetry, having fun with poetry. The second one, the Adalaster Bay, I started getting into more of the, it's short stories, flash fiction. Thank you, yeah. And that was, a lot of the themes in that are themes that I've, as a philosophy has struggled, everyone has struggled with. Philosophers just kind of try to stick the knife in further and think about the problems of human suffering. The problem, you know, I have short stories in there about a couple, one of which goes missing and has been missing for years, and there's no sense of what's the rest of that story. I have stories in there about people who are isolated or who are drifting and don't have a clear narrative in history. There's no narrative about them. They're just gone. Stories about sexual abuse, stories about everything, and that is kind of hard to look at in human life. So I think that's where I started to, you know, that my themes in Zenithism now are also, I would say, a kind of theological exploration of life, and the hardest parts of life being the most important ones to address. The ugly parts, the tragic parts, those are the themes that I start to address in Adalaster. And then the third book, which is called The Charter Party Companion to Private Holidays. These titles, by the way, Hemingway would not approve of.
I love them. I think they're perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, and I did a word count. Each title got longer as they go along. And I consider this kind of a trilogy. These three books are a kind of trilogy of some would call it juvenilia, but I was kind of, you know, I'm in my early 30s when I finished the last one, but I guess you can have a juvenile stage that lasts till 100. But anyways, the third book, Charter Party, is a series of essays. So now I've moved from poetry, which I think is oftentimes the primal form of our language use, to short stories, flash fiction, to essays now, which is like going to more arguments and things. But a lot of the essays in Charter Party, and I have a copy here. It's the yellow one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
lot of essays in this are satire or comedy. So I have one essay that explores from a kind of humorous stock market mindset. We should commodify the vote. And it's this sort of satirical view that, you know, oh, we have all these lines. That is a socialist shortage. If we could just, you know, have a market for votes. So it sort of lampoons, I would say, overviews of market commodification that are a little bit too strong, let's say. I have essays in there that are in the voice of the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek. He's this character. I'm sure some of your viewers may have come across him at some point. You know, he's like always, he has these self-soothing tics.
Yeah, and he's, you know, kind of a rumpled guy.
Rumpled is such a great description. He's a rumpled, frazzled, severe in weird ways, comical in other ways. So I have one that's from his voice about it, just, you know, making fun of his writing style, basically. And the longest essay in this piece is about eschatology. So eschatology is usually thought of in Christian philosophy as the end of things, the furthest of things. So eschaton is a Greek that means like the end. So what's the ultimate ending of all of this stuff? You know, where's it going? What's the story? That's my longest piece, and I explore alternate eschatologies. So that really, I think, segues into my next book, my one that's going to be published on Valentine's Day next year, Zenithism, because Zenithism is about the ultimate sort of ultimates in our natural system, you know, thinking as grandly as you can allow yourself to think about the whole kit and caboodle.
Big questions.
Yes.
As philosophy often leads us to.
Massive, titanic, not in the ship sense, hopefully, questions.
That's very exciting to me. And I'm curious what the research was like for Zenithism. What did you do to prepare to write this book?
So, like I think a lot of philosophy, it grows from many sources over years and years. So I could talk about this in terms of some of the influences. So to name some names, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a French Jesuit paleontologist of the early 20th century. So as a Jesuit Catholic and a paleontologist, he had a kind of difficult dilemma between his Christian faith and certain interpretations that thought evolution wasn't the accurate story, Darwinian evolution, and as a paleontologist, his awareness that, yeah, natural evolution by natural selection that's what happened, right? So how do you make this work? And he came up with I would say, a very beautiful view that merges these two and says something to the effect that God is the end point of a sort of cosmic evolutionary process, and that God, being the end point, is sort of pulling the cosmos into a more complex state. It's a teleological view, pulling it into a more complex state, and that this whole story is a Christian story of some kind. Christ is saving us through this evolutionary process. So it's a very, he died in 1955. His books he took a vow of obedience, and the Catholic hierarchy basically said, don't publish this. So it was published posthumously, a lot of these ideas. So that was one influence. Another is a Russian of the 1800s named Nikolai Fyodorov. He is what is now known as a Russian cosmist, although that's a more recent term.
Could you say his name one more time?
He was a librarian. Yes, Nikolai Fyodorov.
Got it.
And there are different Anglicizations of that Russian name, but Fyodorov. He was a librarian in Moscow in the, I'd say, mid to late 1800s. And his view there was a lot of tumult in Russia at this point, of course. You know, this is the time of Dostoevsky. This is the time of resisting the Tsar and the rise of Bolshevism, et cetera, et cetera. So he saw these views about progress. You know, there's a lot of talk about progress, scientific progress, cultural, social progress. And one of the concerns he had was that historical progress, seems to leave behind all of the dead. All the people, all our ancestors are dead, and a lot of them were killed, murdered, tortured. Just masses of amounts of injustice have occurred in the past. So we can go in the future towards this bliss, but what about everyone else? So in theology, this is called the problem of historical evil. And this is one of the views that oftentimes Enlightenment progress that didn't really account for. We're going, our descendants might be really happy, but what does that mean for all of the children who were killed by Pol Pot, or all of the people sent to the gas chamber at Auschwitz? What is, and Fyodorov, like Dostoevsky also, thought it was unsatisfactory to have a historical view of progress that didn't do something with the past evils, with historical evils. There needs to be some reconciliation with the past. And Dostoevsky went into thinking that God would do this. There would be universal salvation. God would rectify history, as it were. Fyodorov had something similar, but he thought it needs to be done through technology, through science. So he was kind of one of the first, if you will, transhumanists. But unlike a lot of transhumanists now, he thought we need to not just focus about the future, but the past. We need to unite everyone, universally everyone, every faith, every ethnicity, every age group, everyone needs to be put into this ultimate state of bliss, heaven. So we thought we need to engineer paradise. So Fyodorov, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, transhumanism was an influence, but those were the main ones. And then in terms of philosophy and essays, there are also influences I had from fiction. So in fiction, there are a couple particular stories that I grabbed my attention. Science fiction, of course, because it's about science, the use of science for these grand dreams. The three main stories that I came across, I call it eschatological science fiction. Science fiction thinking about the furthest possibilities, not near term. It's the opposite of near term SF. So the three stories, one's a book called Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I don't want to give it away, but Childhood's End is about a kind of evolutionary leap that happens from humans to something called an overmind. That's the plot. I'll just say that. The other work is by Olaf Stapledon. It's called Star Maker. And Star Maker is one of the, how do I put this? It's one of the grandest science fiction novels ever, as of now. The time span and the just spatial span of this novel is insane. It's a short novel, but it covers billions, and it goes to the end. It goes to the end of our cosmos. And it's a theological reflection on the natural world, basically. If you've ever seen Tree of Life by Terrence Malick, it feels like that.
Right.
It feels like you're reading that. Just this, you're seeing the evolution of stars and the death of stars, the evolution of nebula and the death of nebula. And it has I would say it has a dark ending. I won't give that away. It has not a great ending. In fact, C.S. Lewis, the Christian writer, classicist, read it and thought it was kind of pessimistic. So he wrote his own science fiction series called Paralandria as a kind of more
rebuttal.
A rebuttal, exactly, a kind of better vision. But I think that eschatological science fiction piece by Stapledon I recommend for it's just sort of as a meditation for anyone. If you want to think, where am I? Where is it all? I think that's a beautiful meditation on that question. And
Keep going. Yeah.
I was just going to say the last one. The last one is ironically called The Last Question. It's a short story by Isaac Asimov. And the last question, this one I really don't want to give away the ending because it's such a great ending. But it's another reflection. It's short, I recommend it. The ending is great. There's also an audio version that Leonard Nimoy narrated. That's available on YouTube. Anyways, it's another reflection on the ending of things. What is the outcome of this? So what is this evolutionary process? Where's it going? Where is civilizational progress going? When we started with fire, kind of, and we moved to pyramids, to bookmaking, to iPhones, et cetera, et cetera. Where is that going, if anywhere?
That's awesome. You clearly read a lot, which is one of the reasons that I like reading your stuff is because it just seems to have an expansive background and also expansive ideas. With all of this lofty philosophy, what would you say is the most practical application of the ideas presented in your book, Zenithism?
Yes, that's a good question. I think philosophy generally is often thought of as abstract and irrelevant to life. But originally in the ancient world, philosophy was the most important thing because there's a contemporary, he's dead, but a modern philosopher, historian of philosophy named Pierre Hadot. And he wrote a book called Philosophy as a Way of Life. And he looks at ancient philosophy, Socrates, Plato, the Stoics, the Epicureans, and he says it really was a spiritual way of life. it wasn't about arguments. It wasn't about paradoxes or puzzles. Those were part of the overall program, but it really was how to cultivate the good life. So Socrates was really important. He asked the questions, not because, bugging people is fun, but he wanted moral improvement. He wanted clarity. He wanted Athenians and people generally to be, to just open their eyes and be better. And so the practical value of philosophy really is living a good life. So it's like the practical benefit of asking any questions. Am I a bad person? Am I a good person? Who are my friends really? Now, if you ask those questions, you're probably going to improve in certain ways. You're going to say, oh, I'm a bad person, I should change that. So the practical value of philosophy is all the practical value of all these important questions you ask about your own life. And Zenithism, I think the practical value is that it asks questions about, where am I going? What's the narrative arc of my life? Does it have these benefits? What are the drawbacks? Do I have reason to hope for myself or for others? What does Auschwitz look like in the grand scheme of things? What happens to that moment? So the practical value, I think, is the deepest one. It's not, money related per se. It's about, who are you? Where am I? Now that to me is going to inform the rest of your life. It's going to inform your actions in deep ways. It's going to inform your politics. It's going to echo out and ripple out to everything else you do.
I love that. And I think that, a lot of my work is helping people try to live their best life, whether it's on the internet or with business. Part of it is value setting, and you have to do a little bit of philosophical introspection. What fascinates me about Zenithism is this angle you're coming at, the role of technology and how it's bringing us closer to this zenith. What technologies are you considering in your book, and which ones are you most fascinated by?
So just to take a couple steps back.
Yeah, please.
Zenithism, as I define it, is the prospect or hope or position that in an infinite natural system, infinitely many, maximally advanced conscious beings will exist. So that's the kind of condensed version.
Right. So if I were to explain that to a middle schooler, I would say we're capable of creating many gods.
Yeah, and the central point of that is the full context is an infinite natural system. So this is beyond human beings. Mm-hmm. Human beings are one of an infinite number of beings that have evolved in a natural system. So this is not Earth-centered. This is not human-centered. We value ourselves, and I think we have ethical value that is considered by what I call zenith beings. But I don't necessarily think, as transhumanists do, this is where we differ. I don't necessarily think that humans will succeed at their technological advances. I think we've evolved certain features that if we don't address fast enough, we could destroy ourselves. So the author Christopher Hitchens, and a notable atheist, said that our adrenal glands are too big and our prefrontal cortices are too small. So we have a lot of fear, but we don't have a lot of higher order functioning. And that cocktail can make us blow each other up, essentially, for bad reason. There's no good reason to blow it. But,
right. I think we're seeing it today.
Exactly. So meltdowns, social crisis, environmental crisis, every nuclear warfare, all of that to me seems obviously is a very real existential threat. So I don't think necessarily that we'll survive our existential threats. So the technologies that I think about in Zenithism are really eschatological science fiction stuff. So it's not even basically the main one I would say is AI, artificial intelligence, because I do think that, or what Bostrom would call superintelligence. Mm-hmm. Nick Bostrom, the transhumanist out of Oxford, Superintelligence is artificial intelligence that has achieved uh, general human level intelligence and beyond. So anything you can do, it can do better, as the song goes. And it could make all the novels you could possibly write in your lifetime. You could write those in milliseconds. Everything that all the paintings and sculptures of the Renaissance, it can fabricate like that. So I mean, there's a sort of question here about our value in that, but that is the main technology I think about, because I do think zenith beings aren't really organic. I think the organic phase of evolution is giving way to a new phase of digital quantum computational evolution. And if something like mind and experience can manifest in that realm, it's going to be a very fast evolution. Like it's fantasy levels, basically, if it's possible. So I think the main technology I look at is artificial intelligence, its threats, its promises, because I think zenith beings will be the maximum. When I say maximally advanced, I think it's not going to be a squishy brain. It's going to be something that might be doing calculations on gravitational waves, or between whatever the ultimate truths about physics are. It will be harnessing those to optimize. So we're talking about something that is very alien to us.
Yes, and I think I'm realizing that your book is quite literally beyond humans and human comprehension. Yes. Because, like, for example, I live in Seattle. My friends are all software engineers, and everyone's really frustrated that there is a misunderstanding about artificial intelligence, at least the way that we're making it now, because theoretical artificial intelligence and the way that you're thinking about that is completely different from the practical applications of artificial intelligence now and what it can do. Like, people, I would say the layperson thinks that the artificial intelligence that exists is comparable to like this all-knowing zenith thing, when it's actually just like not very smart at all.
Yeah, it's like a weird statistic machine. It's just dealing with, I agree. There's an interesting anecdote. So Isaac Asimov, obviously the famous science fiction writer who dreamt of galaxies beyond galaxies, he had friends, and one of the friends he had worked at MIT's robotics lab. And this friend of his, I forget his name, it could be Marvin Minsky, I don't remember. He said he invited Asimov to MIT to see their robotics. And Asimov's like, no thanks, I don't want to see that, because he was worried that if he thought that would be a kind of anticlimactic thing. Like, he's dreaming of the foundation, the galactic empire with all these AIs. He didn't want to see this sort of piddling box bump into a door 100 times. So I think there's that sort of disconnect, the dream and the reality. And the way I think about it is in terms of possibility. So in an infinite system, if super intelligent AI is possible, given laws of nature or the malleability of nature, then it will have occurred as a sort of infinite. When you roll the dice infinitely, you're going to get each side of the die infinite number of times. Mm-hmm. So if we're at the side of the die that's like one dot, that will happen infinitely many times. But if there's a 6-dot side, let's say that's super intelligent AI, if you roll it enough times, you're going to get it, not only once, but an infinite number of times. So I think that I look often less at the practical application in the moment we're in, the historical moment, which I consider still ancient, and the sort of theoretical physicists. What are theoretical physicists saying is possible, given our current models? So some say, for instance, time travel is possible if you make certain assumptions about how the universe operates. Like, if you can have what's called a sort of, if you can bend space-time in a certain way, you can have a certain kind of time travel. So we're not near that anywhere near that. But if it's theoretically possible in the natural world, then in some part of the natural world, it will be achieved. That's this kind of proposition. So the software engineers of today, I mean, my heart goes out to them, you know, because I bet a lot of them can see this sort of trajectory and they see people thinking we're already there, but it's a long road. I don't necessarily, I'm sort of pessimistic about our prospects of doing it because of our social lives. But if it's possible, physically possible, it's actual in an infinite system. So that's my hope. That's the prospect I think exists.
I find it very interesting that you have considered like this possibility of like singularity level stuff that doesn't involve humans. Like, it does feel a little bit pessimistic, but it also suggests the belief that godlike beings exist and influence us. And I'm curious how, like, it seems like you started your philosophical journey falling out of religion and then almost finding this other one. What's that like?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I think to myself, like, is this just a sort of cryptomnesia, a kind of like, I was reared to have these needs, and so I just sort of ad hoc found something to satisfy those deeply Christian needs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I think about those, we're all parts of communities with histories, and we're all trying to make sense of what's good and what's bad in those histories, or what we need and what it satisfies. And I think the way I think about it is like, I do want certain things. Everyone wants certain things. I do want bad things to stop. You know, I don't want holocausts, for instance. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't want child cancer. I want history to be rectified. So I think the problem with a lot of religions is I found them just implausible. God exists. It's just a sort of fact. You know, it's a necessary being in some way. I thought, okay, maybe, but it's such a complex metaphysical story you have to tell. So once I found these authors like Chardin and Fyodorov talking about the use of science and technology in the natural world to achieve these, and evolution as part of that, I thought, well, there's a story that could be told here that is extremely plausible and does seem to address these deep existential needs. So I think while, of course, it's motivated by existential needs, I don't think, like some religions, it just sort of jumps over the evidence or doesn't examine the plausibility. It says, no, let's go head on. What are the problems with this philosophy? And if it can kind of survive a lot of objections, to me, it's a tenable one. So I think I feel lucky that I was sort of given a kind of rosy hope that then I can kind of, to some extent, change and refine and make plausible for myself, at least, to make it a live option again. So I think it's sort of like mythology. You know, we have these Greek myths that we love to use. They have a lot of power. You know, the myth of Sisyphus has a lot of power in expressing the sense of futility we might have in our work. The Pandora's box, et cetera, et cetera. So I could think of my Christian background as like that. It had a deep mythological function that has allowed me to explore something that if I hadn't had that mythology, I might not have explored. So like, we see this in technology. The mythology of Star Trek leads people to want to invent, like the iPad. You know, the mythology of rockets in space leads people to go to the moon. I think of it like that. The mythology of God leads us to make God. It
motivates, and the stories and dreams that we're pursuing. Is the dream? You have to start with the dream and the capability of imagination.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we start with these dreams, and part of my Zenithist story, the first story in there, How Het's Happy Dream, that's the very first story, is about an ancient Egyptian girl who has a kind of trance on the shore of the Nile. And in this trance, she sees things that will happen, like us on the moon. But she goes to her father, almost, who's a potter. He's very poor, and she describes it, but she describes it in language familiar to ancient Egyptians. Like the things are hieroglyphics that dance to maybe explain computer screens, or we fly like birds to explain jets. And the idea is that we have our historical limitations, and we try to sort of dream out of those and explore what's further, but we are stuck in our historical idiom in a certain way. So we describe, the way I think about our human religion and mythologies are as us trying to describe these things that we want, and we don't know how to necessarily get there. So a lot of times we assume, well, they're there and it's a miracle. But I think deep down humans are trying to explore the zenith state. They've called it God or Allah or whatever you want to call it. And that's one version of a religious theory I have. But I think of them as starter kits, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And we're all together in this human project, and we're in a natural world, and it could be more fascinating than we have imagined, and we didn't necessarily even have the terms or the concepts to even describe it. So when we talk about a transcendent God, that's a way of saying it's pretty amazing. I don't even know how to think about it. And I think about, like, let's think about it more, because at some point this God would understand itself, perhaps fully or most respects. So Zenith, it's sort of like we're getting like opening a Christmas present forever. Or that would maybe be a pessimistic way of putting it, but like you keep opening a Christmas present, like, oh, it gets better, and then you open another one, and it's like it's getting a lot more clear what kind of universe we might be living in.
This is dazzling stuff, and part of the reason that I value your writing and our friendship is when I sit down, it is quite a psychedelic experience. My question is, when you get into these philosophical modes of thought and all of this theorizing and research, how do you come back to your normal life?
I don't know if I come back.
No.
I'm not sure I do, but yeah, sorry.
I mean, is that your answer? Do you feel like you're always living in this space?
Well, I think I come back and I feel refreshed often, because it's a refreshing view. If I was writing a treatise on why the world is a dreary, pessimistic place, I might not come back refreshed from that. But these views are extremely uplifting. So I come back and I feel like everything becomes acceptable. I think it's a very spiritual experience where you look out at a tree, and instead of thinking about bills or thinking about all this stuff, you could think, this moment is deeply important. Everything feels settled. Everything feels fixed. So now I can kind of be stupid. Now I can kind of have folly in my life, because that's part of my life. That's part of this great system. That's part of this whole unfolding cosmos. And I feel like I become Taoist often, where I'm like, let it go, let it flow. There was a philosopher, Ann Cudd, who said that she's a Taoist at night. After all the concerns of the day and she's lying down, then she could be in that Taoist state of letting things flow and being with the way, like Zhuangzi said. So I feel very much comfortable in my existence when I come back from this stuff. I feel very at home. It's sort of like living in a fairy tale a little bit.
Yeah, I think the thing that is interesting is that philosophy, religion, has this ability to make us feel like that everything is okay. However, I look out the door in 2020 and things are decidedly not okay. With racial injustice, with coronavirus, things that are going on in the States. And so how do you balance this bliss with the reality of a lot of the bullshit happening in the States this year?
Massive question. I mean, to me, it's a subset of the question of the problem of evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's this sort of good outcome, this overall good manager of existence, God, whatever, why is this shit happening, right? What is the justification for that? So 2020 is just a little drop in this ocean of blood.
Yes.
And I think this is a deep question, in other words. So I'll just address it at a surface level, because I do address it in my book. I have
Great. And we're going to pick that up February 14th. Where can we get it, by the way?
So you can get it at deepoverstock.com.
Great.
They have a bookshop. They have the area where you can buy it. So deepoverstock.com. I'll just spell it.
Got it. Yeah, I'll put a link inside the thing. It'll be easy to find.
Excellent. Thank you. So a lot of the essays, and actually my book has short stories as well. A lot of them are ways of trying to attack that fundamental problem of evil. If there's this, because I take zenith beings to be maximally ethical. I make the argument in an essay I call positive apeirotheism. That just means positive infinite gods. So if these things are maximally ethical, why is there suffering? Why is there evil? And I think that I want to keep that the short answer would be that we are already with zenith in a sense, because I think of zenith as a time engineer. So when you die, I think that there are good ethical reasons for zenith to preserve you. I call it to immortalize you. But when you're immortalized, it's not just like a linear thing, like I was born and now I just continue on. In some sense, as when you're uplifted to a zenith state, or you're uplifted to some state, that you have a bit of a passport through time. So Connor Miller, when he dies, will wake up, or whatever the case may be, and he'll be in this state where it's probably, you can't describe it. And part of that state will be, you can do things like watch the Big Bang, or you could watch the dinosaurs evolve, time lapse or whatever. You could sit with a squirrel 500 million years ago and just observe its motion. So when did Connor begin? When did Connor exist? The question kind of loses meaning in the global scale, because you're dealing with relativistic time. You're dealing with Connor existed at the Big Bang, and he was born in the 20th century. When did he exist? And so I use that to then discuss the idea that, in some sense, I take a lot from Friedrich Nietzsche here. The idea is, at some point, we affirm our lives to such a maximal degree, and every one of us who's ever lived, I hope zenith would do this. We affirm our lives. We say, we take it all up, and we make it our own. That's our life. And as Nietzsche says, he has a great thought experiment called the eternal recurrence. And he says, would you say yes to every moment of your life? And not only yes, but crave it fervently. Crave nothing more fervently than your life, as the ultimate gravity, as the ultimate weight to a life affirmation. It's a very extreme thought experiment. But I think that given a cosmic perspective that a zenith state could allow us, we could affirm everything. And the moral argument would be, everyone else can too. So it's not just me affirming and all these poor victims are still there. I'm like, I feel good about everything, we're set, justified the universe. Everyone would have to be in that state. So everyone says, when I look at suffering, I say that person has acquitted existence, basically. They've said, no, not guilty to existence. So everyone is uplifted. Everyone affirms the existence they had and the existence they will have eternal, forever, in my view. I'm an immortalist. I do think we'll live on forever, based on science, technology, and zenith states. So that the evil you have now, it's integrated into a holistic affirmation of a cosmic narrative that everyone can affirm. And it's seen in the widest panorama. So one of my big influences is Gottfried Leibniz, who was a rationalist philosopher. of the 1700s.
Yeah. Also letting you know, we're nearing the end here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually in my 60s might just be ranting on a street, like just like, hey, listen to me.
Zizek style.
Yeah, exactly. Just pulling at my shirt. Anyways, so long story short, that's the basic view of my what I call what's called theodicy, or the justice of God, which is a term Leibniz actually coined. Theodikos, God justice in Greek. So that's my view of theodicy, which applies to any case, hopefully. So it would apply to 2020, the one-star reviewed year so far of the 21st century. Yeah.
Nice. I appreciate it. And honestly, these are the kinds of conversations that I like having because they go on for so long, and it makes me excited to sit down with a book that contains these kinds of arguments. So I am super excited about Zenithism. I'm so happy that I was able to talk to you about it. And I look forward to reading it and getting some copies to my friends.
Well, thank you so much, Connor, for having me. I love this conversation. You're great. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to doing it again at some point in the future.
Without a doubt. You know where to find me. Thanks so much for joining me. This has been The Orbit with Jonathan van Belle, and we will see you next time. And